All right, welcome back to Small Towns Unscripted. How you doing, Jim?
I am doing very well.
Angie?
Good.
Jim and Angie Beeson. Man, this I've talked to you about a month ago, and I really appreciate you finding the time to sneak up to Chelan one more time. And
You know what he said when he walked on the porch? What? You tell me what you think, how many people you think have said the same thing. I don't know that I have anything to talk about. I don't know that I'm that interesting. I don't know that I'm, worthy of being.
I already told him that. I don't think I'm as worthy as some of the other people.
Yeah,
when you look at some of the people like the Sackett one and Bill Nickell and some of those guys.
Yeah, there's some old dogs for sure. But
I don't think anybody thinks they're as interesting as they are.
Yeah.
No, in fact, it's fun to learn. One of the things we do. By the way, this is Nickell Turner. Everybody, my name's Russ McClellan. This is Tara Kalen.
We kind of just start blabbing away.
Thanks for tuning in. Jim Beeson. This podcast. I don't know. Have you seen any episodes?
I try to watch them, all of them.
Oh, cool. Thank you.
Cool.
I like the one with your kid. That was good to get that younger perspective of everything too. And,
And that's kind of what it's about, right? Like the diversity of this town is always changing, always has been changing, and part of the idea, the two main goals of this when we started is, in a small town, probably unlike a bigger city where you have more anonymity, in a bigger city you can go to a grocery store and you won't see the same people. 100 times you might see 100 different people. Well, here, as you know, if you go to the grocery store, you might run into people that you have to talk to or want to talk to for a long time. And so getting to know people instead of them. That's one of the things, like we often remember people, I know that guy, and it was 40 years ago. They're not even the same people, right? They've been through ups and downs and all arounds. Or somebody from an industry where, I just know them as a cop, or I just know them at the school. So that's kind of the idea of it. And then the other one that's almost probably more, I think, important is that your family, your sphere of influence, your kids, grandkids, great-grandkids that aren't born yet, they're going to be able to look back and have an authentic conversation. And we call it unscripted because we really don't have an agenda. It's really just sitting down, hanging out. And I know I wish I would have done that with my dad and mom. And I wish, so many people have told us that. Like, that would have been cool.
Yeah.
So those are the two main reasons. And then it's just kind of fun in general.
Just fun to sit and talk about old times.
It is.
And that's been the best part. Listen to the old timers. Tell the stories, because it's changed so much. Like walking up and down the streets of Manson, how many of those buildings were what they were when you were a kid growing up?
Yeah, not very many.
Not very many at all. Same with Chelan. It just all changes. And so,
Well, I remember you because you were at that perfect age where you idolize someone. And I remember I was a Manson guy and you're a Chelan guy, but that 5 years younger is that perfect junior high age when you're looking up.
Yeah.
And you're like, that guy's unstoppable. He was such a great athlete.
Especially if you were into sports.
Sports, yeah. And you ended up, you graduated, I think you went to Central.
Yeah.
You played two sports, right?
Played football and basketball,
Yeah, and then had a terrific career there.
Yeah, it got to the point where it just wasn't fun anymore, where they thought it should be the most important thing in your life. And I knew I wasn't playing the NFL or the NBA or anything like that. And I was focusing on my education and having fun at college as opposed to playing football and basketball all the time. And so, it changes.
And then I'm going to go fast forward and then come all the way back. But you fast forward, you are coaching in Kenai right out of school, right? And stayed there a long time. Hall of Fame coach, Hall of Fame athletic director now. Hall of Fame. Were you Hall of Fame basketball or football?
I was at Chelan. I'm in the Chelan
Hall of Fame. Chelan, right? Yeah. So illustrious career. So then, coming all the way back, because I want to know how when you got married, how many kids you had. So, but I love talking about when you were growing up. Could you describe to people that are maybe just listening and haven't heard anybody talk about it from your perspective? What was Chelan like growing up?
Man, it was vastly different than what it is now. And it was so much back then. Everything was just apple orchardists that was the money in town. And as you well know, when we were kids, what did you do when you were a kid? Work in the orchard all the time.
Till my dad kicked me out because I was too slow.
Yeah.
You,
you catch jammers.
you thin apples, you pick cherries, you pick up props, you rake brush.
Yep.
You just did it all. And I ended up working with my mom, which was like the worst thing in the world, because she was like, if we didn't do it right, she'd go home and tell my dad, and then we really had troubles when we got home. But and there wasn't like this. It was so different in that we were expected to work all the time. Like if you go to the high schools now and ask how many kids now are out thinning apples or doing those kinds of things, there's very few of them doing that, swamping cherries or doing whatever, because it's just not. And especially people like us that were into athletics, we'd be playing some kind of comp something all the time, and that's what our summers would consist of instead of working. So that's probably the biggest change that I've seen, and that's just a cultural change. It has nothing to do with today's kids or anything like that. Today's kids are a product of our culture, and they all have smartphones, and they all have are connected, and they're not outside like you and I were doing when we were kids, out on some dirt court shooting a basketball or doing something, throwing a football around, and you went outside. And I mean, I learned to whistle. Joe Harris and I both have this great ability to whistle, and I never had to carry a whistle all the time.
It haunts me.
I never had to carry a whistle when I coached anything, because I could just whistle. But we would go out at night, we'd go out and play, and then when it get dark, my dad would whistle for us. And that meant it was time to come home, and we had to whistle back that we heard his whistle, so he knew we were coming home. So all the kids I ever coached, how'd you learn to whistle like that? And I don't know, I just had to learn to whistle because I had to answer my dad. So, just out playing, and you talked about I was that perfect age for you. Well, there was all those same kind of. Steve Kline was somebody that, as a kid growing up, that I absolutely had to have two of his baseball cards still, and it kind of comes full circle because he ended up being our baseball coach, pitching coach when I was at Wenatchee, when he came to AD.
Really?
And
fun.
he, had babysit me when I was a kid, and you kind of come full circle. And some of the greatest conversations I ever had was with him. His wife had dementia, was in a home down there, and every time we'd have a road game, he would come down early, and then we'd sit for an hour and a half in my office. Just
I've always heard people about Steve Kline. You end up playing the major leagues, and I've never heard anybody say anything bad about him. He just was a genuinely good dude.
And it's an absolute incredible experience to go to Yankee Stadium and go in the Hall of Fame in Yankey Stadium and see a baseball signed by Steve Kline, a guy that came from Chelan, and just a normal guy.
That's how I feel about Joey.
Yeah.
It's like, it's so fun.
So Steve Kline, Skip Boyd was another one. He played football, kicked it, punted at University of Washington, and was another one that, and it kind of come back full circle because he came back to Chelan and ended up working for him. And
I've talked to Skip about getting on the podcast.
Yeah, he would be another good one. Has a great.
He's a little reluctant because he said the same thing you say. Everybody, like Tara said.
Yeah, but you can get Skip and Mary.
Of course.
She has no problem.
Yeah, and just talk about.
I should go to Mary and get it.
Talk about Mrs. Pingree and the impact that she had as a third grade teacher in Chelan.
Well, all of her legacy of waving on the trolley and riding her bike around, and she was like Miss Congeniality of Chelan.
But the focus of, the whole thing of Chelan was just everybody knew everybody, and it was really hard to, and I know it's the same out here. You could go someplace, and if you did something wrong, somehow your parents are finding out about it because someone saw you that knows you.
Oh,
it was faster than Facebook.
Yeah, Maurice Goodell and I were best friends, and I can't tell you how many times either it was his dad calling my dad or my dad calling his dad and saying, okay, the boys are grounded, this is what they did. And so it's bad when your best friend's dad's grounding you too. And it was never questioned. It was just
parenting.
Yeah, it was just that old adage that it took a village to raise you. There were so many people as a kid growing up, from Gary Goki to Jim and Helen Cool. I spent so much time at Rod Cool's house.
Did you? Were you out there with the cows with Rod?
We never necessarily did a lot of that. We did a lot of fishing and a lot of hunting. I did a lot of that with Gary Goki and Eric Goki. Gary and Jackie Gobles. Kelly moved here when he was in 6th grade, and Gary was our head basketball coach at the high school for a while, and spent a lot of time at their house. And so, you just think about all the people that had such positive influences on your life. You guys can all do it too. There's people in the Manson community that you look back on that, for whatever reason, they took a liking to you and did so many great, incredible things for you as when you were growing up. So that's what made it so unique and special.
How did your people get here?
My dad was born and raised in Chelan. My mom was born in Arkansas, and then her family moved out to Chelan. So both of them graduated from Chelan, and
that's cool.
So, and I was very fortunate in a sense that both my set of grandparents lived in Chelan too.
That's awesome.
Which was, I can remember back on Christmas, we would Christmas Eve go to each of our grandparents' house and spend a little time, and always spend Christmas together as our own family. But
that's so
yeah,
fun.
it was just you take that for granted until you go. Like I moved to Alaska and I started having kids, and we had no family, and you take all that stuff for granted when you're a kid growing up. There's so much you take for granted that. Oh, yeah. When you become adult, you're just, oh man, I didn't realize how good I had it.
Yeah,
no
I have this theory that you talked about this being outside a lot. Sports was, for a lot of us, was basically what you did when you weren't working, right? All of the sports, not just one, which is the difference, I think, now for a lot of kids. They're more specialized. But I have this theory, and you'd be the best guy to ask. And maybe my theory is maybe just because at the time it was nostalgic in my memory that it was different. But one of the things I think was very different was that the economics of these small communities was solid with these apple farmers, which then led to this pride of the community and sports, which led to this generational rivalry, which I don't know if that is the same now because of the economics of the ag industry, for example, really kind of going through. I mean, the last couple of decades been turbulent, and it's been more corporate. And there's, I was raised on 10 acres with my dad raised 3 kids. Yeah. So you have the Bridgeports, the Brewsters, the Okanogans, the Tenasserim. Every one of these little towns, even 7 miles apart, was like, there was no chance in hell we're going to combine. No. You know what I mean? Like, why didn't Manson and Chelan ever go? Like, there was no chance. Those grandparents in the stands yelling at each other.
Yeah, it would never happen.
My kid's going to get back at you for you beating me 40 years ago. No. Do you believe that that's different? Or
I truly do believe it's different. And it's, I mean, there was never a talk when we were kids of like specializing in something.
Right.
And it's, in my opinion, it's the worst thing a kid could do is specialize in a specific thing. I mean, if you ever listen, talk, and read stuff like Patrick Mahomes would tell you, he was a 3-sport athlete, and he says the absolute best thing he ever did was he played shortstop in baseball, and I taught him how to do all those little sidearm, do all this. He was a point guard on a basketball team, gave him that vision to be able to see the field and do everything. And there's so much to, my oldest daughter is a perfect example. She was a good volleyball and basketball player, but not good at some other things. And we had many conversations about how, you need the people that are, especially in smaller schools, you need everybody to participate in things. Even though it's not your best thing, you need to do this because Liren, her best friend, needs people on the team to help her for the team to be better. Just like when you're doing basketball, you want Liren to do basketball too, that makes you better. And there's so much that can be learned from being, which I never had the ability, I never was that kid, but that's not the point of it. To be that kid that comes to practice every single day, knows that they're not going to get a play, but they work their tail off every day and they make the team better, but yet then they may turn around and then they'll be, in basketball, they never get a play, but in football, they're the star of the football team. Right. It's really good for kids to go from being the star of the team to being that kid that never gets to play but is expected to show up and work hard every day. It gives you a complete different perspective.
As you get older and the teams 100%. Get more competitive, they have practice-only squads. Somebody's got to be on that squad.
Yeah, that's
Somebody's
a cultural
shift.
Yeah.
The stay-home team.
I can tell you, we won in football, and in football in Alaska, it's a lot different because there's not near as many schools and everything. And but we won 6 state championships in football, and
4 in a row.
And the very first thing we would do in the locker room after we won the state championship game is we would have every kid stand up that was on the scout team that never got to play a lot, but we would stand up, and that's the first group of kids we would recognize because those were the most important kids because we couldn't practice if they weren't out there emulating Soldotna's offense, Soldotna's defense, and helping us get better and doing a good job of it. So for kids to see the different, to go from being that kid to being the kid is always good for kids to learn. So whether you're not, today's kids, I think, focus on, they just always want to be the kid, and if they can't be the kid, I suck at that, so I'm not going to do it. Well, that's even more reason to do it, to try to get better and to help the team get better, and for them to get better as a person, to see that they can sacrifice of themselves and their ego to help the team get better.
Yeah, there's a good example. A friend of mine from here, actually, his son's most likely going to get drafted, and they had a state playoff game that he decided to, on one hand, you'd have a family that says, well, you're about to go to the major leagues. You're done playing high school. I don't care that you're in the playoffs. You're not going to get hurt. You're not going to whatever, right? And he's like, and he's playing. And I thought, like, it was even, that wouldn't have even been a conversation.
Yeah.
There would have been no chance that anybody could have, with a straight face, said you're not going to finish your high school on your team.
Right.
But now it's like the argument that, well, you're going to be a multi-millionaire. This wasn't that important. And I'm like,
team is a concept, though, not a.
And your word should be the most important thing. That if you're not worth your word, when you tell somebody you're going to do something, then you're not worth anything.
That's the definition of
integrity. You make a commitment to do something, then you're there till the end. That's like all those college football guys that opt out of bowl games or whatever.
Yeah.
I mean, it just drives me crazy.
Me too.
I don't know.
Yeah. When did it start to, like, Rod Cool? You were your schoolmates with. I asked him a similar question about kids in general, and he said that freshman class of 2014, something like a light switch went off in the entitlement of their attitude or the spoiledness, and he thought it was because the iPhone was invented in 2007, and he kind of thought that maybe social media, maybe the smartphone had something to do with it. Do you feel like there's been a shift? Or not.
And everybody talks about kids, and I tell kids all the time, any kids that I've had, I stress to them the most important thing they can ever do is just have a work ethic. And if they have a work ethic, they're going to set themselves apart from all their classmates, because there's not that many of them that work hard. And that's not a reflection, I don't think, on the kids. That's more on the culture that's taking place at home. It's impossible. Like when I was the athletic director at Wenatchee, Title IX is a big thing, and we had to show that we had to look at our numbers of female participants compared to male participants, and based on our school population, there has to be the same percentage of male participants as there is male total student body, and we never met it because we had, and it's just like anywhere, everybody has such a large Hispanic population. Well, in the Hispanic culture, the males participate more than what the females do. The females are going home and helping mom take care of their siblings, cooking dinner because mom might be out in the orchard, might work in the shed, doing whatever. And I can't go into that house and change that culture. It's just not going to work. I'm not going to. In Wenatchee, we'd get 110 boys try out for boys soccer, and we may get 40 girls try out. And it was just because it's such a big deal in that Hispanic culture, and the boys participate and change. So I think a lot of it is just a change in culture.
Well, I get your work ethic.
And there's so many of these comp teams and travel teams, and the coaches are telling them how great they are because their parents are paying them money. They're going to tell them how great they are, but yet they're sacrificing. They're telling them you can't go play, you can't go to summer football, you can't go to basketball, you got to focus on baseball all the time, and I'm going to get you a scholarship. And it's those people they're just killing it for people. Yeah,
it's almost like they don't. I wish they could feel what it felt like to have that pride of being a part of something that was special for the rest of your life. And that's that collective small town stuff, I guess, for lack of a better word, where you're in everything together. You go from one season to another, whether you're the star or whether you're not playing. I mean, the guys I admired most are the guys that never played in anything, but they were always there, and they were always working their ass off. You know, I used to say there was so much peer pressure that if a guy wanted to play video games, he got his butt kicked. So that we needed his big butt to block out. So I don't care if you're 5 foot nothing, you got a big butt. So we're gonna get you on the basketball team. We need the numbers.
Some of my years in Kenai, we had like 400 kids in the school, and we would have 85 boys playing football. Now, that didn't mean we had 85 football players. We maybe had 8 to 10 football players, but we had 85 of them out there. Some of them would be at the back of the line every single time you turn around. They're at the back of the line because they don't want to do whatever it is, but they wanted to be on the sideline wearing a jersey and hang out with their buddies and doing the things that you do. But I think some of it too is that, you know, over time there's been a change, like in the coaches, and it's hard to find, having run an athletic program for 10 years in Wenatchee, it's hard to find coaches that really buy into the fact, like, you're coaching basketball and I'm coaching baseball, and you and I sit down and say, okay, here's our schedules, here's what we're going to do, we're going to share these kids. We're not going to put kids in a position where they have to make a choice because two adults can't sit down and have conversations and figure it out. And that's happening less and less now. Everybody's so focused on their thing, and then they may tell me that they're not telling their kids that they have to be there all the time, but that's what they're telling their kids. And so it's putting kids in that position where they have to make a choice, and they're trying to please two adults, and that's not what kids should be having to do. I would add that it really got worse too. The whole COVID experience made things, I mean, it skyrocketed. It made it just 3 times as bad as what it was.
Did you watch this episodes with Luke Wall and then John and Kristen?
I watched part of that.
With only 7 seconds, and that's a real function of that time where, you know, there was the anxiety went through the roof, and the confusion, and then the entitlement, isolationism.
Well, they're saying that some kids, depending on the age, it's like 3 years back now. Like they're
starting to feel
maturity and their comfortability, their sociability is all 3 years behind.
What's funny?
Just educationally, they were way behind, because it was just. I mean, I can't tell you how many kids would come up to me in the fall and say, following fall, yeah, Mr. Beeson, I was a 4.0 last spring. That was the first time I've ever been a 4.0, and I mean, because they just gave them grades for. They came on to the whatever they were doing, the thing. They just logged in and you got credit.
How does that work?
But that was the hardest time for me professionally in my 36 years in education, of dealing with parents, because it became so entitled dealing with parents. First it was just, I don't care what we have to do, we have to play games. So then we get games and the state's telling us, okay, you can only have so many people, or you can't have people there, blah, blah, blah. So then we have all these rules, and then people just show up and I don't care, I'm here to watch my kid. You can call the cops, I don't care. I don't know. I mean, just such an entitlement. And that's carried over to now. It's really, it hasn't gone back to pre-COVID.
Wild. There was people calling each other in real estate where I saw you walk into your office, they call. Like, what are you doing?
People were telling on other people for.
You know,
it was weird when we finally were able to. So, I mean, we had kids when we had to stop wearing masks, kids were like, "Who are you?" Because they'd only seen you in a mask on, and then it's like, "Oh, you're completely different." And it was such a crazy, crazy time. I'm just glad I didn't have any grandkids or any of my kids were in the education system. My youngest was at Eastern for the last tail end of it, but he kind of liked it because his girlfriend was in Seattle, so he could just live in Seattle and remote, do all of his stuff.
So you ended up with, we bounce around a lot on this podcast. So you have 2 kids?
I have 4 kids, and my wife has 2.
So you guys have a blended 6 kids. Yeah. Nice.
What are all the ages?
Really?
Yeah, I don't know. My oldest was born in 90, and my youngest was born in 98, so like 35 to whatever.
Makes the youngest, so what are we at, 28?
He's 24, 25, I don't know.
So did you guys meet up in Alaska?
Yeah.
Were you a teacher?
No, I actually lived up there 30 years with my parents and my brother, and then, I worked for what they call counties down here. I worked for a borough. So the roads department, but we met because our girls, this is the funny part, so I'm from Soldotna, which is Kenai, one of Kenai's biggest rivalry.
Oh, nice.
It was great. But so our girls played, together in cop soccer, which was during the summertime, so we had, a combination of both Kenai and Soldotna. So long story short, I met him at a game.
Well, it was, and to say that we were rivals is an understatement.
We still don't have
it was, there was, My kids wouldn't wear anything that was blue. We didn't keep anything that was blue because they were Soldotna stars.
Like street
so
games.
of course we never wore any Converse. You couldn't get a Converse because they have stars on.
Oh,
so we just, it was just, but that's just the way the whole building was. I mean, I spoke at graduation 3 or 4 times, and my final comment I always remember, blue is not really a color because you can't. But so I had, it was kind of, I had come down, I brought my basketball and football teams down here every year. We would start raising money in April, and we'd go out and sweep parking lots, rake yards, anything that you didn't have done around your house or something. They would call the high school, hey, who's that crazy guy that brings kids out and does work? And we would come out and we would make $20,000 to $30,000 in about a month and a half. But I would go out and work with them, and I'd probably be fired now. Down here, I'd probably be fired for sure, saying some of the things that I did to the kids in terms of, I mean, if it wasn't done right, we were doing it until it was done right.
Right. Did you feel that pressure from parents at some point up there in the latter part of your years in Alaska or in Wenatchee versus in the beginning? Did you see the cultural shift in the administration and the legislation and
like the politics?
We've talked to a lot of I have a lot of friends and
right, like could you get away with more then than you could now?
Yeah.
And now
it was very different up there because I mean, I came in and our school district had 44 sites. And so then I became the assistant principal. I just was in charge of I just told our principal, I'm in charge of the building. You take care of all of the in-service, all of that district office stuff. I hated doing all of that. I just was red and black and white. Kenai, we were doing things the Kenai way, and that was just it. And we were always, Kenai was a very blue-collar, commercial fishermen, oil industry, those kinds of people. And if the people trusted you, I brought kids down here, and I had a kid that had her knee scoped down here with me when I was down here on a basketball trip. And I mean, it was just, so during my time in Kenai, I never really had, I was supported by a great group of parents, great kids. I was super, super lucky to get in this situation. When I got hired at Kenai, the average years of teaching was 28 years, and I had 1. And I had a little tiny lady, Judy Marlowe, that was my fellow business education teacher, that she was probably 5 foot tall and maybe weighed 90 pounds. You've been to Alaska before, and Alaska, the great part about Alaska is everybody's kind of come from someplace else, and it's the greatest. I would move back to Alaska tomorrow if my wife would say, let's move. And it's not because... not because the weather says. And that kind of stuff, but it's the people. The people are just unique and different, and they're just you're just everybody's a part of everything you do. And Judy just took it upon herself. She adopted me. She would come in every day and check on me and make sure I was doing okay. And I'm, a bigger guy, and she's this little tiny lady, but man, she'd bring me moose meat, bring me eggs all the time, and just take care of things. A lady named Lois Massey was probably 4'8" and 90 pounds. I'd constantly walk around. She'd come up, sneak behind me and pinch me on the butt, and I'm turning around thinking, I'm 24 years old and thinking, oh God. What's going on there? And I turn around, it's Lois sitting there laughing at me. And but it was such a great experience for me to be a part of people that, Cliff Massey, her husband, was my Alaska dad. He was a school board member, been the head basketball coach, head boys and girls basketball coach, drove the bus, just did everything, and he just took it upon himself and
adopted you.
Yeah, and just taught me how to. He says, you got to learn how to do things the Kenai way, and this is the Kenai way. You don't want to go to Soldotna because it's the hospital's there, the lawyers are there. It was a different mentality, and the kids were different, and we were 8 miles apart, separated by the Kenai River. It was so ironic. I spent 25 years in Kenai, and then I go to Wenatchee, and it's Wenatchee-Eastmont, about 6 miles apart, separated by a river. But we were kind of the opposite. We had the hospital, and they were more the blue collar than we were. But it was just a great place to work. Now it's becoming. They've changed. The state doesn't have a state-funded retirement system, so it's harder and harder to get. They used to pay a lot more, and the retirement system. I retired at I was eligible for retirement at 20 years. I have full medical insurance for both of us through my retirement in Alaska. So it's a huge, huge deal, and it's not that way anymore. So it's harder and harder to find teachers. But I can really tell you, I mean, I got out of Wenatchee. I retired at Wenatchee. I still would I love being around kids, and I love doing things and making an impact on kids' lives. But it was dealing with all the other stuff, exactly what you're talking about. That having, when you're working for people that have a different mindset or a different philosophy on how things should be done than what you do, then it's time to get out and find something else.
Yeah, I've seen, this is my 35th year, I think, in real estate. And I started while I was in college at 19, and then I think COVID did it. I think, we talk about generational stuff like the younger generation, millennials, but Gen Z, but I think it's spread to everybody. Because you said about work ethic. I mean, there's a wild statistic that I heard in real estate last year. Something like 75% of the realtors in the United States didn't do a deal. Not one deal. Now, that's including a lot of part-time people that have other jobs and stuff, but still, I had almost 100 agents in Wenatchee a few years ago under my license, and the Pareto principle, that 80-20 rule, it's more like 95-5. I mean, and it's not, and it's by choice. Like, a lot of people are just by choice, and it's confusing to me because I know I'm seeing people struggling, and I'm like, you do know you don't get paid for time, like sitting around at the coffee shop and like
doing nothing. I
mean, it's like maybe you're talking to somebody. I see you doing not a lot, and you're like 20 hours a week, and your truck's getting repossessed. I'm just curious, like, how does this work? And the confusing part to me was, like, in my career, I built a lot of teams, and in the beginning, I could tell if you were a $35,000 a year person. Like, once you hit that number, you're going to coast. Or if you're a $100,000 a year person, everybody had a different game plan, which is always cool about being self-employed because you are your own boss. You're a subcontractor. You're not an employee. So it's this little bit of that I always understood. But when people are really suffering and they just have apathy and they're like, I got to have a work-life balance. So this is, and I just could never get my brain around, like, how does someone get to that point where it's fundamentally not working? You're getting evicted. You're losing your truck. You're getting arrested for not paying child support. Like, what are you doing? Like, what's going on in your head?
I think it comes back again to the culture of the home life. I mean, what would your dad have done if someone would have called him and said you weren't working? I can tell you, when I worked at Trout, my dad was the head refrigeration guy at Trout. And I spent a lot of summers out here working out here at Manson with Charlie Egan. And my dad flat told me the number one thing was I never had to worry about my boss firing me. He said, if I catch you not working, it's it, you're done. You're not going to embarrass me. You're going to have a work ethic, and you're going to work hard. And that's probably the biggest thing that my dad ever instilled in me was just, when you sign on to do something, whether your boss is standing there watching you or not, you're working the same way all the time, and you're giving someone an honest day's work for an honest day's wage, and that is not taking place now.
Yeah.
If that was my kids that are not doing anything, then I don't care how old they are, we're having a conversation about.
Yeah, my dad I tell this story a lot because it's pretty fascinating. I was like 12, and I didn't really like thinning apples since I didn't really like raking bunch. I like driving the tractor, but I always drove too fast. I hit trees. I didn't mow good enough. So I was always like moving and shaking and trying to get to the lake, trying to get to the basketball gym, something I was doing. And one day he goes, well, I'm not going to force you to be an orchardist, but here's the thing. We're going to go down to Cats and Jammers, which is the restaurant out here, and I'm going to introduce you to the owner of that restaurant. Because today, if you don't want to do this, that's fine. You're going to wash dishes for these guys. So the guy comes out. His name was Bill at the time. And he goes, hey, he thought my dad was pissed about something, right? And then the cowboy's sitting there. My dad was a lot like John Wayne, just a lot smaller. So he had a green Ford pickup, and he shows up, and he goes, my son needs a job. And he goes, okay. How old's your son? He goes, how old does he need to be? And he's like, it's an Indian reservation, right? So he's like, okay. And then my dad, to his credit, dropped me off at 12 years old at 4 o'clock. I'd be done at 2 a.m., washing dishes all night, cleaning the restaurant, and he'd pick me up. So he had the commitment to help me understand work ethic, because there's nothing like back then 300 dinners a night and one dishwasher.
Okay, I have to
You're
defend
crazy.
some kids right now. I have had a business in Chelan for 16 years.
You had a what?
Businesses.
Oh,
in
businesses,
Chelan
yeah.
For that,
Yeah,
where
and
I
you've
have
said- you've
where I
said
have
this about kids.
employees, and I only hire kids
Yeah, it's interesting.
because they're the only ones that work. In my experience.
Yeah, I wouldn't.
Once they get to be in their 20s and up, they know everything.
Mm-hmm.
And they just want to just sit there and be a clerk and not talk to anyone and I hire 14, 15, 16-year-olds. They're like, what do we do? What do I do? Show me what to do. I'm excited to have a check. I want to have a job. I want to have a thing. I'll do that. I'll do that. I'll do that. They're my best.
It's funny because I remember having
I mean,
a
not
conversation
in
with Ed
excess where it bothers me.
You know, Ed Worthing
Very well,
from
yeah.
Water
Yeah, very well.
Did the shave ice stuff all the time.
Of course. Yeah.
He would sit down and interview high school kids, and first question he would say is, okay, what activities do you do? And he was a firm believer that he wanted kids that were in activities. And the second question he'd say is, have your parents, you ever heard anybody use the F word before? And if they said no, then he wouldn't hire them, because he said, then his theory was, if you haven't heard that, then you haven't been in situations where things haven't gone right and someone's gotten mad at you. Yeah, something, and there's been some conflict and you've had to deal with the conflict. And
I think that's the involvement too, right? Like the coaches I've had in my life, I was pretty lucky for a small town to have some cool dudes. You know, Mark Marney was Tom Alexander, and then our Wenatchee Valley coach, he only made it 1 year because I think he was fired the first day and they just had to let him. He came from out of town, but he was so intense. Bobby Knight was his idol, and that first day, Frank and I, like, we're not in Kansas anymore. Like, we just got, and there was,
basically.
oh God, or it was incredible. Like, and then it was one of those things, we hated him. We would do anything to get out of practice during and then after a while, you made it past that, and then we would do anything to play for him.
Yeah.
And he brought so much out of us as small town kids, just from a work ethic perspective, because we weren't jumping 4 feet off the ground or doing anything. But that lesson, that discipline and that accountability and that teamwork, and that's where, when you were saying those kids that were working hard, because we were like literally 3 hours a day, and I'm not joking, like his name's Ramey, and like Steve Stamps and I talk about, they were good friends because Steve was coaching the girls at the time. I mean, he had like 10 kids in his family. They were all boys. Dad was a Marine drill sergeant. I mean, legit, like this guy was legit Bobby Knight on steroids.
And Bobby Knight was the man.
He was the man, and Wenatchee wasn't quite ready for it, but we had a great time. And I never forgot, because I remember in that first, Frank and I were captains, and I was like, he's like, you in shape? I'm like, yeah. He goes, okay. I didn't know what in shape meant. Yeah. I thought I did.
I envisioned that you were throwing up in a garbage can moments later.
Well, I was just telling the story today. I think I told it my sister today. I said that first day we had like 100 some walk-ons, and there was like 8 or 10 of us that had these little scholarships to play at community college, and he goes, "Why you guys got basketballs?" And we're all like, "What?" Put basketballs away and then start running. And he was just going to eliminate people.
Yeah.
And if you stop, and then he said stuff like, if you threw up on my gym, just keep running, because you got that garbage can and that sink, and then just keep running. And then we ran forever, and then pretty soon it was down to 50 kids, and then it was down to 30 kids. Gosh. And then he goes, all right, you guys done warming up? And it's been like 2 hours of running. Wow. He goes, we're going to do sprints now. And I go, what? At the end of the day, it's a true story. Frank and I, he blows the whistle. He wouldn't let us look down. He had to look him in the eye the whole time. You're dying, like literally dying in your head. You think, I've never been this tired in my life. He finally blows the whistle. Frank and I fall down, and I think Steve tells the story best. He goes, I looked out there, and there was the 2 Manson kids. They're passed out asleep in the middle of the floor, and they didn't move. I'm talking to them, and there's like zombies. Well, after a whole year of that, or 9 months of that, you realize that, you can do things you didn't think you could do. And that carried over for me. And, as a self-employed entrepreneur, I've been through ups and downs and all arounds. And that is the kind of stuff that you don't need to be a professional athlete to get. You just need to,
like he was saying,
you just need to have that. But it's those memories that when things do get rough, you're like, okay, well, that I was very, very lucky to have a guy like that. And if it wasn't for my dad, to your point, I think that is hard for a lot of kids. And I think as an educator, I bet and a coach, I would imagine that's one of the hardest things to translate when you see a kid that's comes from a bad place, but he has a good attitude or he's trying, but then he goes home. I mean, is that one of the...
Yeah, there's a lot of that, or you're just going home and there's nothing there. And I read a book one time written by Ruby Payne, and it talked about how, a lot of times as educators, you get focused on little things, like kid shows up every day to class and doesn't have a pencil and a piece of paper and something to work, and then you're
riding
on them and riding them all the time, but you don't know the backstory that the kid's just showing up to your class. Be thankful that he's showing up for your class, because he may be at home and his mom's got a boyfriend and they got drunk that night and threw his mom's birthday cake in the garbage can and whatever.
Yes.
You just never know what's going on behind. And so you just work with what you have, and you can't ever give up on kids. That's the biggest thing, is you have kids that, I mean, I had a kid that, he got kicked out of a private school, how he ends up at Kline and graduates, plays football and basketball, great athlete, but he was always in trouble, always doing something he shouldn't be doing. That summer he was working for his uncle and always sitting around drinking beer, and then he decides, I'm going to join the Marine Corps. Well, he goes from being this kid that's in trouble all the time to he ends up being the chief mechanic on the Marine One, which is a helicopter that flies the president all over. So you would go on CNN, and here he is standing there saluting the president. Awesome. I mean, this kid was there's absolutely no way you would believe this kid would ever, but you just can't give up on him because there's something good in every kid, and you just gotta. It's finding that something good in every kid and finding what motivates that kid. That's the hard part now too, is just finding what motivates them and getting them, because it's harder and harder with the technology that we have.
I don't think writing anybody for lack or their behavior helps anyone, kid, grown up, anybody.
It's just like being a parent, though. You have to, like, I can guarantee you Russ's basketball coach knew the kids that, I mean, I did all the time. I know the kids that when we were really good in football, and we had a kid that played quarterback for me that his dad had mental issues and stuff, and he would spend more time at my house than he did anywhere else. And but he was a kid that I knew. I would just tell him before practice, okay, just buckle up. I'm going to yell at you today.
Buckle up.
and he was our quarterback, and athletically wasn't our best player, but was our best player. And so you just know the kids that you can get on and set the tone with, and then you know the kids, like her son, you cannot yell at him. I mean, I've had many it's much easier to be a parent to her kids than it is sometimes for my own kids, because it's easier to be objective when they're not your own kids. And, and I can just see she starts getting on him and yelling at him, and he just completely shuts down. Yeah, Angie, you can't do that. You just and when we have many conversations like that.
It's harder when you're the parent, because you're the one getting frustrated.
And that's the rabbit trail I got down. We were talking about how we met. So I'd come down here during the summertime, and I had Angie Coleman and I, which I know you know Angie. Angie and I had dated in high school, and then I'd gotten divorced and she had gotten divorced, and we kind of started dating, and we were kind of doing I'm in Alaska, she's in Washington deal for a year, and then I came down here, and plan was I was going to stay here all summer, and it just wasn't working out. I wasn't a very good dad. I was missing my kids' stuff, so I changed my plane ticket and went back, and my youngest daughter had a soccer tournament in Anchorage that weekend, and I get there, and of course, typical Alaskan summer, it's raining like there's no tomorrow. And I come from being down here in the middle of July to go up there, and it's vastly different gear that you need, just like your bear hunt you went on. I'm sure you took different gear.
Oh boy.
And so I'm standing over underneath this tree trying to stay dry. And finally I just said, look, I came here to watch my daughter play. I'm going to go over there and get soaking wet or whatever. And then she comes up and says, hey, if you
good-looking guy.
If you want to hold my umbrella, you can stand underneath it with me. And
oldest trick in the book.
So that's kind of how it started. It went from
I like that.
Anyway,
Jim
just
had a plan.
Finish that story, but
Don't give Jim credit for that.
Yeah, that was all her.
That was all her.
She's got moves.
I guarantee
He gets no credit for
that. It wasn't,
I tried, Jim.
Yeah. But,
thought you were strategic.
But it really was her daughter went to Soldotna, and I went and supported her daughter. Her daughter was a volleyball and a soccer player, but I'd never wear anything that said Soldotna. Anything
To this day, it sounds like.
you
guys have different rooms?
Blue over here in my closet.
But deep down, I was always rooting for Kenai. You didn't have blue. You had just
I had
all
Kylie
over.
go to her summer
She's the
camp.
most unorganized. I'm very concrete, sequential. My closet's organized by color. They all face the same direction.
Oh my
They're
God.
all
Really?
This is worse than Chelan and Manson.
Interesting. I wouldn't have guessed that.
She just messes with me
That's-
sometimes.
yeah.
Takes something and just sticks it right in the middle.
You
and,
say organized, she says anal. That's how you know
Yeah.
people are married.
Yeah,
yeah.
that's hilarious.
Vernacular matters, people.
So you implied that living in Alaska is not for you year round.
Oh,
So is that why you guys are here?
Oh, just got so. I could have retired at 20 years, and all my kids were in high school. My youngest was, in fact, I interviewed for the AD job. What's the guy's name that's the AD now?
Where? In Chelan
Here,
or Manson?
here at Manson.
Severson.
Anyway, I don't think that's who got the. I interviewed for the job and got. So my youngest was an avid golfer and wanted to move out of Alaska and wanted to go someplace, and so I was divorced, and so my ex-wife was getting a portion of my retirement. So it didn't make a lot of sense to stay up there and continue putting money into a retirement she was going to get a portion of. So I retired and started drawing my retirement when I was looking for jobs here. And I interviewed for the job, the AD job. It was the guy's now the assistant superintendent at Eastmont now, was the superintendent at the time. And he offered me the job. And problem, I mean, it wasn't the highest paying job. And to be honest with you, the hardest thing was,
Rivalry.
well, the hardest thing was is their colors are blue. I mean, it was, we went for so
wow.
long.
You
thinking-
are.
The Manson Trojan.
You got brainwashed.
But the other part was the AD
love
office
Duke
was
too, then.
outside of the building. They had this little house outside the school
funny.
building
Wow.
was where the AD's office was. And that just completely goes against everything. I want to be in the middle of everything
Yeah,
and
you
be
kind
part
of
of it with the
probably
kids.
felt
and-
disjointed from.
yeah, and so I turned the job down, and the following year I got the job in Wenatchee, and so that I retired.
And you can wear purple.
And
Yeah.
it wasn't the
Was it
easiest
blue?
thing to do, but it was.
Better than blue. Okay.
And the irony was the school that she has a younger brother, 10 years younger, and he went to Skyview, which is another school outside of Soldotna. They split Soldotna into two schools, and they were the Purple and the Panthers. And her dad runs a smoke shop, a fish processing, does everything, and he always was a chain gang, and the chain gang's always on the visiting sidelines. And we were good. I mean, it's amazing how good players make coaches look like they're good and know what they're doing, because when you have talent, you can, and if you just use the KISS method and just keep it simple.
Yeah.
And we ran the football, and we had tough kids, and we were good. But it was not being the sideline referee on our side wasn't the pick of the jobs that anybody wanted to when they were assigning the referees for
Pretty
the game.
hostile
'Cause
environment.
It was a. People would say, like, and when Angie went during COVID, our boys and girls basketball coaches both got COVID at the same time, and so I coached both the boys and the girls. And after the first game, everybody's like, "Oh, that's a side of you I've never seen." And just the intensity level and everything was a little bit different. And her dad, the first time she told her dad that she was dating me is I can't say.
Oh my gosh, this is intense.
You're just that guy is not going to be around my grandkids.
This
Fighting
is
words.
intense.
Oh my
Because-
gosh.
Because all he had seen me was coaching football, and it wasn't like I was yelling and screaming, and abusing. I mean, I was loud, but it was
You were
intense.
a football
if
coach.
it was, yeah.
Well, see, you have to get to know you.
Did a
instead
lot of
of
talking with my hands, like
That's why there's
But now it's great. We get along great, but that initial reaction when all he had seen me as a coach
He was like,
that was like going to. That whole thing of going to the grocery store and people never. I started shopping in Soldotna because you go to Kenai and a 15-minute trip takes an hour and a half because you just see everybody and
oh
everybody
my
wants to talk
gosh.
to you.
Yeah, I mean, I would go to the post office at 8 o'clock at night
Yeah.
so that I could just go to the post office.
But that's a good thing. That means that everybody knows everybody, and
But sometimes you're not in it.
a
Right?
place like
Sometimes you're
Chelan or
not into
Manson
it.
is the absolute best place to raise your kids. A small town, a small school atmosphere. your kids are involved in so many things just because whether they want to or their buddies are doing it or whatever, and it's small enough that they can do those things.
That's the opportunity part of it, and the teamwork and going for something that you don't think you can do. I've had a lot of, over the years of selling real estate in this town, I've met a lot of executives that hired and fired a lot of people in bigger companies, and more than one occasion in their hiring process, unofficially, they'll ask, like, what else did you do? Did you do band? Did you do, like, you might have been a 4.0 student, you might have, but if you're one-dimensional, they just wouldn't hire you. And I think there's some real logic to that, and I think it's important that kids growing up are told that, like, there's more going on here than you just being the best X player you can be in that X sport. It's much more than that, and I don't know if that's happening, and I'm sure there's case by case, and in general, I think it's a wave that sometimes probably goes through different classes.
Depends on the classes.
And the parents are huge, but just in general, I think that that's why I went back to the economics. Like, it's just hard to, when your family doesn't have the money to pay the bills or to pay rent, or your car's getting towed, or it's hard to be focused on sports when you have all these other things happening. And back when we were younger, like I said, 10 acres of apples you could raise a family on. And so you had all these small farmers, which I miss. I mean, that's the one thing I miss about growing up is the pride. They still have pride, but it's like, you just know there's a struggle.
It's different. And it's a different type of pride because you're not out working with and Jim Stamps and Steve Stamps. I mean, I worked with them all the time. I mean, my brother and I always worked together, and by God, he wasn't going to work harder than I was because he was older.
Jim was a good man. My dad and him were really good.
What though, like this year, I don't know the exact number of Manson grads, but it was in the 50s. Wow, I know. Yeah. And my class was 21.
22.
Yours was 22. So
and 16
and they
were
were
K
saying that's a small class.
50 something.
Yeah, and I'm thinking small. That's over twice as many kids as we had, and we were still all doing all the things.
Well, just look at all the stuff look at all the Microsoft money that's here now in the Chelan Valley. I mean, and those people, even if they had homes here then, they weren't necessarily. That was another thing with COVID too, is this area became a very popular Zoom destination because they could come and go to school here and if they're going to do it online, and the people were working from home, and why not do it in this valley where it's an absolute
No, it is definitely
great
changed the demographic for sure.
What created this
and it's changed the money part of it where you're not, you don't know, like, I mean, I remember when I was 16, I got picked up by Wenatchee to play the state AAU basketball, and they went to New Orleans and played in the national AAU tournament. Don and Lynn Coleman, I mean, my parents didn't have a lot of money and I couldn't afford anything, but Don Coleman made sure I had spending money in my pocket and everything was paid for, and Gobles was another one that paid. I can remember times where they would fly me down to a basketball game on Friday night and fly me back Saturday morning for a baseball doubleheader, and then back down and playing basketball. And,
it wasn't because you're a bad athlete.
No, but
you're a good guy too, right?
But it was,
that's the cool thing about it.
But it was, but the people that are, I mean, I think a lot of why people did things for me like that was though because I wasn't out causing trouble, and I was working hard, and my dad made sure I was working hard, and it was never, I'd always ask Don Coleman, is there anything I can go do for you? I really appreciate you're giving me this money. What can I do to help give back to what you're doing? And that's kind of what I've carried over, like with my kids when they were growing up. They wanted to go to close-up. That was a big thing when in Kenai. They had their 8th grade history teacher was the absolute living legend, Bob Summer in Kenai. Kind of get choked up talking about him. He's such a great guy. But he took the kids every year to close-up in Washington, D.C., and my kids, every one of them went.
What is that?
It's like go see the Capitol, do government stuff, and
it's like civics.
Like a program.
Civics, yeah, it's a program.
Okay.
So you're getting choked up because he was such a good man.
Oh yeah, he was.
I love that.
He was an 8th grade middle school teacher and probably spoke at graduation maybe 20 times.
What made him
survivor? So beloved.
What made him different than all the other good men?
I think he was like your dad almost. That he never sugarcoated anything. It was like, this is how it is. But like all good people like that, he was hard on the kids, but yet the kids knew that he would do anything for them.
Yeah, I think that's it.
That's probably why we had a lot of success when I was coaching football. Was my defensive coordinator was the principal at our 3 through 5 elementary school. My head JV coach was our middle school PE teacher, and then I was at the high school. So from the time they were in 3rd grade, all they knew was Kenai football.
And they trusted these people, all these people.
But yeah, and the best advice I ever got was from Cliff Massey, and he told me, look, your job as the head coach is to find good assistant coaches, hire good assistant coaches, and then let them do their job. Don't have an ego. Don't let your ego get in the way. Don't worry about, okay, we're winning. Who's getting the credit for we're winning? Just be thankful that you're winning and everybody, because you're not going to do it all yourself. You can't do it all yourself.
Nobody likes being micromanaged.
And so, God, I don't even remember where I was going. But
one of the things that the whole thing that it always, with your background especially, this is I think I'd love to ask you this question. What would you say? Knowing all and seeing all the kids you've seen in your own life, what would you say to your 16-year-old self now? Like, what advice would you give your 16-year-old self?
I would start off by what my high school basketball coach told me when I was 16 years old was, I was on the bus, thought I was the only sophomore. When I was in high school, you could play varsity basketball and football when you were a 10th grader. You couldn't when you were a 9th grader, but in the spring, like baseball and tennis and those things, you could play as a 9th grader. I never really understood that. But so I was a 4-year letterman in baseball. And so, I went through high school and never played a JV game because I was this size when I was an 8th grader in high school. And but I remember him, I thought I was a little bit bigger than what my britches were, and I remember him just flat out telling me, you just need to keep your mouth shut, figure out where your place is, show up and work hard every day, and then things will happen for you. But so that's the first time, just like I tell kids all the time, just be thankful for the things you have, work hard every day, sacrifice of yourself, be the betterment, the needs of as Spock said on Star Trek, the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few, and you need to be sacrificing of yourself for everybody else, and be there for your teammates and for somebody that doesn't have maybe as much as what you have. And that's kind of what I was going back to I was a yeller screamer, and I would tell the kids all the time, there's going to be times where your parents are pissed as hell at me when you go home and whatever. I said, all that matters is this group in this room. If you guys understand what we're doing, what we're trying to accomplish, and feel like you can come and communicate with me, then that's all that matters. It doesn't matter what anybody outside of my defensive coordinator was huge, and we did a lot of goal setting stuff, and like I probably have something on what's on the back of this shirt, dear. Doing business as DBA. So it was dream, believe, achieve. We were big in all that stuff, and
she's from across the river.
We would have weekly meetings. We'd have meetings with our captains and just stress on, okay, you guys got to be able to communicate with us and talk about what's going on. And I think that comes back to not having an ego, and that would be another thing that I would tell myself is go through life and don't have an ego. Don't think you're better than what you are, because there's always somebody better than you, and you're going to get farther in life by just working hard and being a humble person than you ever will by thinking you're great, because there's always somebody better than you are.
That is so true.
Truth bombs.
Yeah, that is so true.
Just clip that.
It's true. It's true, though. That's like the most unattractive quality in people.
Yeah.
I really feel like.
And the whole goal setting thing, it was funny because we had a kid that then graduated and went to school, and then he ended up working for the Raiders and the Texans and Denver. And I remember one time he came back and he was talking. He says, Coach Dawson would get up and he would do he'd take Russ and put a blindfold on him and then get out there and tell him to juggle. And of course, Russ when he was a kid would think he can do anything anyway. He didn't have to see. And then balls go everywhere. And he says, see, that's what's like not having goals and not having an objective, figuring out where you're going in life and what you want to do. So we would in football, we would have offensive goals, defensive goals, special team goals, and just overall team goals. And then I would make the goal charts up Coach Dawson would come up with all the goals and give them to me, and I'd make the charts up. We'd post in the locker room, and then every week I'd update them and put whether we accomplished them, whether we didn't accomplish them. And you'd see more of the PE kids that would stop and look at them. God, this is kind of cool. Well, Luke Oliver was a kid that he's like, he came back one time. He says, I used to think this was the biggest bunch of hogwash, and you guys didn't know what you're talking about. And he says, then I walk into the Raiders locker room, and the first thing I see is goal charts up on the wall. And he says, I've just learned to use that more in my everyday life and everything that I do. And so it's stuff like that that really makes you feel like you had an impact. Probably another little rabbit trail. One of the things I'm like most that I think is the coolest thing about some of the things that I've done is, when I was in Alaska, I had my right knee replaced. And the guy that replaced my right knee was the starting tailback on the first team that I was the head football coach for. And he may not have been the best surgeon, but I can absolutely guarantee you that I was going to get his A game when he operated.
Right, you got the best deal on that table that day.
And that was the beauty of being in a small town. I saw when you were talking to Rod about when you went into the doctor, and I mean, like, the nurse, her son played hockey with her son, and the two that came in the middle of the night to check my temperature and everything were former students. And I mean, it's...
This is why I feel safe. Brody's 8, almost 9, and he gets stuck here at work with me quite a bit. And, like now it's summer. Manson Bay is 2 blocks away. Yeah. There's a bunch of kids and families that he's going to know. The lifeguard there, is paying attention and knows who he is. So that is such a great benefit.
Yeah.
That it does take a village. And when I'm here, he has the option, go walk down the street, go jump in the lake, go play for a couple hours. I know that he's safe. He can feel safe. I mean, that's great. My kids hated it growing up. That's a unique experience.
Because probably 2/3 of the police force in Kenai were former students of mine. The last 2 chief of police, the current one and the one before him, were former students of mine. And like my two boys just are avid golfers. I mean, as a kid growing up, it was so expensive to go golf, and there was things like golfing and skiing. Well, skiing was always during basketball season, so I never did that. But it was always so expensive to go do those things, and we didn't have a lot of money. There was 3 kids, and but my kids hung out at the golf course all the time, and I was never at the golf course. But everybody at the golf course knew whose kids they were, and it was that my kids knew that it was going to be a phone call to me, and if they didn't behave themselves, that it was.
I think I think 2 things are true at the same time. Kids hate it and kids love it.
Yeah.
Because they wouldn't.
They don't like getting caught.
Well, I mean, sure, no one likes to get in trouble, but then that's how we learn boundaries, and that's how we learn how loved we are.
And they will never tell you, but they want discipline.
Yeah,
100%.
I mean, so when I first got divorced, my 2 oldest kids stayed with me full time, and my 2 youngest went back and forth a week, and eventually they both ended up with me all the time. And my youngest daughter, I was the assistant principal at Kenai. My youngest daughter, when she's a 9th grader, comes to school drunk. The only thing that saved her was I was coaching basketball at the time, and we were in Kodiak, which Kodiak's an island, and you got to fly to or take the ferry to.
So you were not there.
It was our region tournament. We called our districts our region tournament. So I was there. I went on Wednesday, and she came to school on Thursday drunk. So we had played our first game, and we were like 6th out of 8 teams, and we played the number 2 seed. And God, we ended up losing at the buzzer, and. As soon as that game got over, our principal's calling me, and I'm thinking, God, what parents called and complained that we didn't win? Because we had a freshman kid, AJ Hull, that played quarterback for me too. Was a phenomenal athlete, and I just played him all the time. He was our best player, and so I'm assuming one of the senior parents was complaining about their kid not getting to play or whatever. But he was calling to tell me my daughter came to school drunk. Mm-hmm. The thing that saved her was I was in Kodiak until Sunday, and
you had time to calm down.
Yeah, that's as the assistant principal, I use this story all the time, telling parents, never respond right away. You've got to give yourself. For me, I had to stop and quit focusing on how embarrassing it was for me as an adult, working in the building and working with and focus on why did she come to school drunk. Focus on the problem instead of the side effects, everything else that comes around of it, and. So when we got back, we had a conversation and said, Angie and I sit her down and said, okay, tomorrow we're going to sit down and we're going to have a conversation about this, but I want you to create a list and come up with things that we can do to help you so we're not in this situation. And she came back the next day, and the number one thing on her list is she says, Dad, I think I need to leave with you and Angie full time.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, she was upset. And
no, she just said, the difference is, Dad, I can talk my mom into doing anything I want to do, and you guys, there's rules, and if I say I'm going to go stay at Adriana's house, you're going to call Adriana's parents and make sure that I'm supposed to be coming.
No.
And you just check up on me and make sure that I'm doing whatever I'm saying. So the point is the kids want discipline.
100%.
I mean, all those kids that I coached, we were disciplined, and as a result, they all saw that we weren't always the most talented team, but that's the thing. Coaching football is you can win with less talent coaching football. I mean, it's way easier to coach football than it is to coach basketball, because basketball, there's only 5 people out there, and if you've got the 5 best dudes on the floor, I don't care who's coaching them, the athleticism is going to take over.
Because it's so fast.
Because it's so fast, and it's jumping, and it's with football, it's every play. And if my defense coordinator, I guarantee you, had a photographic memory. He could line 10 kids up on the first day of school, go through and get their name, and come right back, and then get at lunch and get 7 out of 10 of them right. And by Christmas time, he'd line them up behind the curtain and pick them out by their shoes. I mean, he was just incredible. Wow. So the ability to just know what the other teams are doing and be prepared for what they're doing and responding. There's so much of that kind of stuff in football.
Yeah, that seems very hard to me, actually. The strategy, and that there's always a pause and a regroup, and then an action, and then a pause, and then a regroup, and then an action. It's like, oh my gosh.
It's such a fun game too, and I look at not being going to be a pro athlete or even a college football player, but it was by far my favorite sport in high school, and I was lucky to play 8-man football, which made it like just like a Nerf, crazy. Like crazy Nerf football backyard, do this, do that, and I had a great quarterback in Frank, and
you had to play both, right?
All the time, yeah. And what was fun about it, I told this to Desiree, Frank's wife, Desiree Phelps, Sackett, I said, one of the things I got into real estate for, when I was done playing, we played in the Tacoma Dome. I think we lost by 2 to go to the state championship.
Don't say you think you know exactly.
I've watched the tape over and over again. Every time every time that last play, it's close. It's 1 yard line.
Let me think.
2-point conversion.
2-point conversion.
So anyway, I said selling real estate is the closest thing to B8 football there is that I could find.
Yeah, it's just competitive.
And every day is a new thrill of victory, agony, defeat. There's a lot of players, a lot of hostility sometimes, a lot of everything. And I was like, she goes, man, I just told her that last year. She goes, I've never heard you say that before. That makes a lot of sense about you now, because that is such a wild sport and hard to duplicate.
Just so he's not the only one. At 1996, we were in Alaska. We all started off playing in the same classification. So we have 400 kids.
Oh.
And we're playing against the Anchorage schools and the Valley schools that all are 1,500 to 2,000, some of them more than 2,000. And,
wow.
And we had been really good. And the group of juniors that year, there was 28 kids that were juniors that played JV football. And so as juniors playing JV football, they had a lot of success. They weren't very good, but they were older kids playing against younger kids, and so they had a lot of success. And then, breeding just if you're successful, success breed. It's easy to continue to keep winning. People they start believing it. And that group of kids just, for whatever reason, thought they were good, and they really weren't that good. But we started the year off 0-3. I can remember I had an assistant coach named Al Hull. And Al was one of those guys that he would be fired every day today. But
yeah, that's Ramey.
We got beat by Palmer 48-0. And it was a home game. We went to Paradiso's, and Al shows up. Because we always went out afterwards, and he comes in. He's got everything turned inside out, duct tape over anything that says Kenai football. And a long story short, we never lost again until the semifinals. We played Chugiak in the semifinals, and the guy that coached Chugiak was a guy named Bruce Shear, who had been at Kenai. Kenai started, all the oil money, and they started playing. There was a prison. They started playing out at the prison, and it was all these guys from Texas that were playing. And initially, Kenai was always really good, and Bruce was the coach, and they had a lot of success. And 2 of my assistants played for him, and so, he had this thing. The very first play, we lined up, and when they were on offense, right before they snap the ball, every one of our defensive linemen just come out and just smack them when they're standing in their stance, and then start pointing. He moved the ball. He moved it, because that's what Bruce would do all the time.
Oh, funny.
And they had 2,200 kids. They had a kid named Johansi Humphrey that ended up at Montana and set the career rushing record at Montana. We held him to 330 yards. But we ended up with the ball on the 1 yard line as time was expiring, and if we'd have ran, if the idiot calling plays would have called a dive left instead of a dive right, we'd have been going for 2 to win the game and go to the state championship game. But
you never forget.
You just
my dad watched that game every day for 6 months, and he kept, God, you lost again.
Yeah,
you lost again.
Those are the things you just can't get rid of. You can think back of, I can remember those kinds of things I can't remember. The state championships I can remember a little bit, but I don't, but that game when we lost, you remember those things that stick with you because. Yeah,
we had that game. We took that game for a reunion with the guys that are around here this year. We went to the Mill Bay Casino and put it up. And there was we had an announcer, Scott Brundage, that was, if you listen to the radio, it sounded like an NFL game, because he was such a good broadcaster. So we had that going, and the reason I bring that up is I was looking through all this stuff that I sent in to get digitized that were all these old VHS tapes, and I found one of you and I playing together AU ball in the gym in 87, 86, 88, somewhere in there, and it was just rap ball.
Yeah.
And my dad videotaped it from the stands, and it was just all the old guys that would go in and play, all ages, just young and old. And he had it to music, and I was like, they nicknamed my dad Video Don, because he had one of those first big video cameras. And
oh my gosh,
he went to everything, taped practices, give it to the coaches to watch the practices. I mean, he was doing.
Yeah, there was never a question your dad loved you.
No.
I mean, look at all the things. Think back of all the things that your dad sacrificed of.
Oh, yeah.
So that he could be there to watch you.
Yeah, and it's a good example of his dad died in front of him when he was 8, right down here at the swimming hole, and so he didn't really have a lot of mentorship, but he had the desire and the heart to do the best he could do, and that meant not just with me, that was going to the character of an individual, being selfless. I literally know people that would call him. He'd have no idea who they were. I'm stuck on the pass. Could you come up middle of winter and change my tire? All right. No questions. I mean, and I think to your point earlier about all those guys that helped you, that was the norm.
Yeah,
for sure.
In the character of men and the families and women. My mom was so supportive. I joke around, and I when I speak sometimes, I go, I had a mom that was too supportive, because she'd be like, "What do you want to do when you grow up?" And I go, "I want to be a bank robber." She goes, "You'll be a good bank robber." Can I be the getaway driver?
I'm going to tell you this great story though.
Okay.
We had Carl on.
Carl Ward.
Yep.
Yeah.
Do you know Carl Ward?
Yeah.
And his wife. And my beetle died in town. I was at a meeting at the Grange Hall, and my beetle died. And we pushed it back into a spot. And when Carl left here that day, he gave me a hug and he said, if you ever need anything, call me. And I'm like, well, okay. I got a dead car in town, and I don't know what to do about it. And the throttle's just
in the mechanic shop for 28 years.
Yeah. And so I called him, and I had called Bow Wow and ordered the part, and I was leaving to Stehekin that day, and I had it mailed to his house. And when he had a free minute, he came down and fixed it for me. He called me and said, it's ready to go.
Well, that's I always preface it by, when I tell people that, I say, and I'm going to be mad at you if you don't call me, because people want to help other people.
Yeah, I think so too.
I mean, truly genuine good people want to help other people.
Yeah,
when they
it's
make
like,
an offer,
why didn't you call me when you were doing that?
Right.
I would have been there.
That was when I talk about the people in Alaska, that's what it was like. There's less and less people like that nowadays. I think more people.
Yeah.
But I can remember we were coming back from the Big C relays. My youngest daughter was a great track athlete. I don't know where she got it from. It certainly wasn't her dad, because I never did any running. But we went to the Big C relays in Anchorage, and it was hard for me to see a lot of her stuff, because I was coaching football and basketball, and when it was something different of what I was doing, I was busy at school all the time, and we got a flat tire at Cooper Landing coming back from Anchorage. And we had a little donut tire, and it's 11 o'clock at night, and some guy just pulls over. Where are you going? Well, we're from Kenai. And he goes, well, I'm going to Soldotna. What size tire is that? He goes back and looks, and his spare tire was the same size here. take this tire and call me when you get back to Soldotna, and then we'll make connections.
Yes.
And I know this guy from
so
Adam.
great. Yeah.
But yet, that's the thing is those people would always do that, stop and help you with, just because that's just human nature. They want to help.
I wonder if that's like sometimes I think I'm just cynical, like people have changed, but to your point, I think people still want to help, but they're almost afraid
to help.
Like there's this vulnerability that they're afraid of, and maybe that's social media.
Yeah,
you know,
just the awareness of the bad things that could happen.
Yes,
it's just
the over awareness.
Yeah, now it's over aware.
Yeah.
So
Rod talked about
you
that.
know, more guarded. You're just more careful.
People get sued all the time.
Yeah.
You know, there's like that, and then there's
more to it. Like me, if I saw you and a young female, and
yes, I know.
That's the other thing. The photographs
fear around it. Yes.
On cameras, everybody's phone is a camera now. Where
phone.
thank God that wasn't the case when we were growing
people
up.
have guilt in asking for help.
Yeah.
I don't want to seem like I need help, or I feel bad because I put you out.
You have the two sides that are happening simultaneously, which makes it more of a division versus like
because when Carl
human nature
was here, how many stories did he have?
He's very emotional
helping
too.
people.
I think it was all of his
he's
stories.
a giving guy,
and he just does it. Like he doesn't care. He's
wants
still
to help
out there
people.
doing it.
Yeah, and he's willing to vocally say it on social media or to anybody. I'm going to do the right thing.
He grew
I
up
don't
in
care
a
if you.
It's awesome.
You know,
tough environment.
So I think like what you've been saying this whole time. I think the culture has changed. Yeah. I don't necessarily think that people
have changed.
No,
it's just a culture.
Well, and you know, it's all around it.
Just look at. Here's a good example too. Is that you see there's. In education now, you're more common to see, you always have to ask for like a second email address or something because it's not. Yeah. There's more split homes than there's ever been before.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
God, where was I going?
Well, I was going to say something, and when you get your thought back, but I was going to say about my kids were 10 and 5 when my first wife and I, the kids' mom, got divorced. And to her credit about discipline, we had a pact, and that it wasn't their fault that we did it. And so to her credit, we would ground the kids because they were young, and the other person had to enforce it. Yeah. So if that wouldn't have been the case, and if we wouldn't have both done that, and it was very, very inconvenient. Because, but if not, see you later.
Well, that's exactly where I was going.
I'm ever going to get that.
Is so much of the parenting today is either a split home where one of the parents doesn't. The parent wants to be their friend with their high school kid. And I told my kids, look, if you expect me to compromise what's right and wrong because you want me to be your friend, that ain't happening. If that's what you want, then you're not going to come and live with me. It's going to be we're not going to compromise. I'll be your friend when you're 30 years old, but right now I don't have to be your friend. You have to respect me, but I'm not going to be. You don't have to be. We don't have to be friends.
No, I used to say,
and there's so much of that going that I think there's a lot of that where parenting has gotten to where they want to be their friend,
popularity
and they're compromising what's right to be their friend.
No, I tell them mine point blank. I'm not your friend. I'm your trainer. Point blank. That's what I am.
That's a very unique situation, I think, you and Grace.
Yeah.
Because I think mine is
give her
common,
a lot of credit.
One person is the parent and one person is the fun one.
Yeah, Disneyland Dad. And I was guilty of that too. I mean, that's what I mean by I give her a lot of credit because I was going down that, all of a sudden made a little money, and the Disneyland Dad thing kind of became a little easier to do. And then my dad and mom were kind of a rock, and I was lucky to have that mentorship of like, hey, look, dude, like, like the ego check, like, you need to understand the week you have your kids, whatever you're doing on this week, it's going to have to be more focused on this. And if I didn't have that, I could have easily fallen into being as immature as I was.
That's more common.
I'm sure.
I would agree. 100%. I would agree with that.
So it's just kids are like this all the time. Like, what's going on? Where am I? What are
it's
the
hard
rules?
enough anyway.
What are the...
Well, every environment's different.
Well, it's like you said it earlier, my son was a pretty good football player and really good, and ended up getting hurt a little bit and then came back and did pretty good. But when he was younger, my late Bill Sargent was one of my best friends, right? And he was coaching 7th or I think 8th grade. And that was kind of, he still had a chip on his shoulder, and he was still kind of pissed about the divorce, even though he was kind of quiet. My daughter was a flamethrower, My son was pretty quiet. And one day he's playing football, and the rest of the kids, he got pulled out or something by Bill, and he started pouting. And he stood on the sideline at halftime when everybody else went to turn out, and I'm in the stands. I'm looking over there, and my son just got his arms crossed on the sidelines. And I was just like, I'm like coming out stands, and he's a brave kid, because I was like, everybody's like, is he gonna kill him? Like, is he gonna slap his kid around? What's he doing? Because I was pissed. And then we had a little chat with him, but I had to get to the root of what was really happening in your head. It really didn't have a lot to do with football. It really didn't have a lot. It had to do with he was lost.
Right. It's that Ruby Payne book, figuring out what's the core of the problem, not. Everybody focuses on the problem instead of what's causing the problem.
Yeah, and sometimes screaming at the problem.
Yeah.
No, I was guilty of that a lot too. But I mean, you try. The other thing is, nobody gets you a blueprint. Nobody says, "Hey, this is exactly how to work with that kid, and this is exactly how to work with that kid." Like you said, they're so different.
Well, you got to parent I don't have kids, but from what I've been told, you have to parent every kid different. So.
They're also different.
Yeah.
I've got 4, and I mean, my 2 daughters. I would tell any of you that if you wanted to hire somebody, you would hire one of my 2 daughters. They are the hardest working. They got more of their dad's characteristics than my 2 sons. My 2 sons are trying to figure out how to get through life. And they're going to do things the right way, but they are not the 2 hardest workers of my 4 kids. But that, I mean, they're all very successful.
Yeah. Well, they don't have to be like you. That's what I had to learn. Like, they're
that's the different. And my 2 boys are not like me, and that's been the hardest thing for me to recognize, that they're not. They're different than me. Now, my oldest daughter is. I mean, that's why we get along so well, is because she just. I can't tell you how many times she's told my youngest son, Nick, why don't you just shut up and listen to Dad? He knows what he's talking about. He's been in it. He's done it. Right. Just shut up and listen to him.
Now, did you get along with her when she was a teenager?
Well, when it was funny, when she was in high school. She's a super bright. She got into CrossFit, and she'd whip any of us. She's because but part of her work ethic and stuff. But she wasn't as athletic. Like, she had a great basketball mind, and she could shoot the ball. Problem was is she had to be absolutely wide open to shoot the ball, because she was so slow shooting the basketball. And my youngest daughter was super athletic, had no basketball mind. I mean, it would be a breakaway lane, and it'd be a 50-50 proposition whether it's going in or not going in. She'd just run right out the end of the gym and then come right back, and she never would
track
quit.
Star. Yeah.
And this is I also tell parents this all the time. You got to learn your kids. Like my oldest daughter during high school, some of it was she was a senior and my youngest was a sophomore, and the sophomore was more athletic, but I couldn't. It would be, Dad, she finally told me, Dad, you can't come and talk to me after a game. I said, okay, why is that, Lexi? And she goes, well, you just always focus on the negative stuff. You focus on the things I did wrong instead of focus on the things I did
Lexi.
right. But my youngest daughter would be,
tell me
Dad,
wanting all of it.
Tell me, what did I do wrong? How can I get better? What can I do?
Yeah, you do have to know the kid.
And it's funny, when my oldest graduated, she went to a Division III school and played basketball. It's proof that anybody, if they want to find a place to go play, they can go play, because she wasn't that great, but she played because she worked her tail off. Yeah. And at that point in time, then her boyfriend's mom had an online subscription to watch the games, and she sent me all this stuff, and Dad, can you watch the game and then tell me what I'm doing wrong and how. So it completely changed when she got to college, and then I don't know if it was because she wasn't playing with her sister or she just had a different view of it. But
the reason I asked that is I remember battling. My daughter got kidnapped by aliens when she was about 16. Her body was still there, but something was gone inside. And then she came back at about 19, 17, something. But there was a couple years there I was like, this is not my kid. And she was so intense and such a flamethrower, and so and there was stuff happening outside, that after the divorce, she was 10, and then at 15 there was things that happened. But their mom just basically said, Russ, the reason you guys are battling each other so intense is that you're a lot alike. Like you're both like stubborn. You're both like, she is like a mini you. And then my son kind of morphed more into his mom's personality, a little bit more quiet. And I also joke around and I said, that adversity, like any adversity, if you can overcome it without too much trauma, But sometimes the trauma leads to what makes you so driven, what makes you so able to overcome life after.
The silver lining of it all.
Yeah. And I think that, I look at, and the parents are a big part of that too. So, I've told the story before, but my kid was 16 when I went bankrupt in 2008. So I thought I was like, up here when the run to real estate was going up, I was like, great, I'm invincible.
Was that about the time we were going to put a golf course up on the Butte and all that stuff?
Yeah, all that stuff. Yeah. And then in 2008, the entire, I didn't know there was this thing called the banking industry that could collapse and all these things that I had no idea about. Yeah. But it was funny because my daughter was 16 in 2008, and she was, again, every other week. So I'm driving an expensive car. I got my own office. I've got all this stuff. I got a big house. And she didn't really know. I knew. She didn't really know this is all coming to an end. Like, this whole world of real estate is going away. And, I'm self-employed. So, like, there's no, union helping me. This is like you're crashing and you're going to have to make it back.
You're going to have to start over again.
Yeah, you start over again. And so she's like, hey, it's my birthday. And I'm telling the story for a reason. But she's like, my birthday, about my present. And I'm like, what do you mean? She goes, it's my 16th birthday, my new car. And I'm like, She goes, I go, well, it's good. I'm glad you asked me. I go, and she didn't know anything about it yet. I go, do you know, I got good news and bad news, I told her. And she was like, what's the good news? And I go, I bought you a new car for your birthday. And she's thinking like BMW. So she's like, yeah. And she, wait a minute. What's the bad news? I go, I bought it for you the day you were born. You get the 1992 Honda Accord. It's out there in that field. I still have it. It's got the weeds around it. She goes, not the Honda Roddy. And I go, yep, that's your car, kid. And then from that moment forward, then it spiraled down, and I lived in my office for 2 years on a couch. And my son she went to college, and my son was living in the back room of my office. And I mean, it was like a wild ride to try to get back on my feet. And she kind of witnessed that, and she kind of had to go through that as a kid, the embarrassment. Your dad went bankrupt, and you don't get a BMW, you got to drive a piece of crap. But if it wasn't for that, and she became a doctor of audiology, she now has 2 kids and married and doing great. But that adversity, if I kind of think back and I go, if I would have been that guy that never kind of got humbled the way I needed.
Yeah, where would you? We might not be sitting here right now.
Probably not. I mean,
she would have gotten all the things she ever wanted, and life would have been just smooth sailing.
Yeah, so in hindsight, obviously it was really kind of a bad deal at the time, and it wasn't what anybody wants to go through. But for me personally, I think I personally needed it. I think being a big fish, little pond athlete and staying in a small town and then having things kind of come pretty easy in sales just based on pure timing of the economy, and that we had a pretty good run until 2008. And then your family, like watching you go through it and then they go through it, whether it's a divorce or whether it's financial, whatever it is. I think these are good lessons.
I would say this because I would tell, he's been bankrupt before, but he's bad, but it doesn't change who you are either. I mean, that's the part that.
Yeah, my biggest fear was getting a job. I just wanted to stay selling real estate. Yeah. So I would do anything in the world to not have to go get a job not doing what I love doing. So it's just, I looked at it like losing a championship. I just said, well, we went 0-12.
Start running again.
I guess I got to work harder.
Well, that's how my defensive coordinator's favorite saying was, and he would always, we would circle up at the red gate before we came on the field, and we'd always have a quote of the day, and it had to be applicable. So you'd read the quote and then say how it applies to us and what our situation was. I mean, I can remember, it is amazing. Kids would come up with like a Lou Holtz quote that God gave you eyes in the front of your head, not in the back of your head, so you can see where you're going, not where you've already been. Mm-hmm. And then kids say, look, we were state champs last year, but that doesn't mean squat going forward. And but Jim's favorite saying was, the type of person you're going to become in life, and he always focused on a football game was just we were preparing for our performance out on the football field, and no different than a choir or the band or taking a test or anything else. That was just how our performance was. We were going to be judged on what we did on the field on Friday or Saturday. And he said, how you respond to adversity is going to dictate what kind of person you are in your life.
Adversity breeds clarity if you let it. I mean, it always does.
You survived a whole lot of adversity, but the reality is you're probably a better person because of it,
100%.
and your kids are probably better because
100%.
of it, because they've seen Dad can go through this. It can't be much worse than this, and he survived, and look at him now.
Right, and they experienced it for themselves, and then when they are married and have their own,
when life hits, because it will. I also joke. My son became a Marine for 5 years, right? And I said, you got to thank your sister for that. He's like, what? Well, she wouldn't shut up, so you learned to listen a long time ago. So when you went to the Marine Corps, you just shut up and
be a good husband.
Sorry if I remember.
No. I was just going to say, Nickell said earlier that you have to parent every kid differently when you have kids. But also, I will say what I learned when I became a parent is that I have to start reparenting myself.
What do you mean by that?
You find all the shit that happened to you and that your parents did, and you got to weed out the good from the bad, the pros from the cons.
Rather than just duplicate it?
Yeah, it wasn't all good. And that we all maybe bury some things that happened to us that hurt our feelings, or all the times my dad yelled at me in the car after every game and I'm in the back, in tears.
Yeah.
That impact,
that's
as
a
a 50-year-old, I can still feel that. Like if I want to talk about it, I can cry about it. You start realizing that you need to parent yourself because you don't want to do that to your kids. You don't want to pay all of it forward.
And we always want our kids to do better than what we did, and so I think that's some of it too. Is because we want our kids to have more things than what we had,
or be better, or do better.
We forget about how valuable it was to have to go out and thin apples or rake brush or pick up props or do whatever to make sure. That was one of the stories I was getting off on when my kids went to close-up is every time they went to go, we had to go out and someone would call and say, okay, I need my lawn mowed. And so Nick was the youngest one, what I remember the most. We would go out and I would do the majority of all the work, but he would get the money, and so he would have to be there with his dad while we were doing it. This lady, 89-year-old lady that called me and wanted us to mow her lawn all the time. Her husband was 91 and had dementia. She would dress him up every single day and set him in his recliner. And when we would get there, she would have cookies and coffee and beer, whatever you wanted, she had. And so we just had this deal. My son's job was to go in the house for an hour and a half and talk to the lady, and I would do the job. So, because I knew I would get it done better than he would. And she would tell you, I think I'm the only one that can do things right, but it's just little things like that. But but it was one of those moments where with your kids that he can go in and have empathy for this 89-year-old lady that's just looking for somebody to talk to because her husband can't remember anything, and that's what her life has got to, where she's back in that's in sickness and in health. I'm taking care of my spouse until he dies, and she was 100% dialed in on that. But it's just making your kids go out and do the things. He got what he wanted to do, is to go to his close-up thing, and we made the money. But I'm not going to call all of his relatives and say, "Hey, can you donate some money and give him?" He needs to know that there's got to be something done in order for him to get that money. And
well, it's weird. My dad was a big mentor for my son, and he worked with him. Right. Well, if you work with my dad, like most dads at that time, there's no water breaks. There's no, you might get a sandwich while you're working, maybe. And my dad just had this driven mindset that he just did it, he just did it.
That's just the way it was.
And Mason was in the beginning it was struggling, but as he started, it was like kindergarten working with him, He just, my dad and my dad and my kids were both always close. But then in the third grade, when you ask the kids what they want to do when they grow up, there was one of those things, third or fourth grade. Most kids were like football player, police officer, fireman, whatever, doctor. My son was Marine, in like the fourth grade. And I don't know if that's because my dad was drafted in Korea but he just knew. And then he just did it. And he did it quietly, right? So he just does everything kind of quietly. And now we're working together. He's doing excavation with Todd Corrigan. And we're doing developments together, and it's so different because they had their own path. And that's the thing about trying to predetermine a kid's path. When I would have thought that would have been so great that I do this with him, and we spent a lot of time. I coached all this stuff, but in reality, my daughter and I were more alike. And his mom and him connected a little bit more. you know, for what, it's just different. So you just have to embrace that.
Well, in every situation, and I'm sure working with kids your whole life, there's so many examples of this. I have very few. But I've learned a lot about, with my son, nature versus nurture, because he's adopted. And so what I used to believe was a big factor, I'm now seeing really is not. So much is the nurture portion. I mean, there's a lot to be said about our genes, but it's more...
Yeah, it's more the environment that they're in.
It is. I mean, it might be a genetic...
There is some, like you were talking about my daughter being... So my daughter's senior year, she decides... We ended up, when we became a family, we bought a house right outside of Soldotna, which was... We were actually closer to the Kenai. We were actually closer to the Kenai city limits.
Can you believe that happened?
Kenai city limits went way far this direction, and Soldotna city limits didn't go very far. So technically, we were closer to the city of Kenai than we were the city of Soldotna.
Okay, yes.
But we found this big 6-bedroom house that fit all of us.
Yeah.
And my oldest daughter at first was just like, God, Dad, this is too far away from all my friends. The social part of everything. She couldn't. Well, then. At the beginning of her senior year, she says to me, she says, Dad, I want to take AP Calculus at Soldotna. And so she would take first period AP Calculus, have a release period, and then come back for 3rd through 7th period. I said, no way in hell. You're not going to Soldotna. No. She goes, Dad, I want to take AP Math. This is, I don't know, I may need this later in life. She comes up with all this big story about why she needed to take it. Well, the real story behind it was the competitor in her was there was like 10 of them that were all 4.0, and the GPAs were weighted with AP classes, so they counted more. And so they all had taken all of the AP classes at Kenai, and so if she took the AP class at Soldotna, she had one more, so she would be valedictorian. So
I thought it was either that or a boy.
It just went. That we ended up having to meet and change our policy and da 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 da. So she didn't end up being. I mean, she was a valedictorian. She just was co-valedictorian.
She almost gamified it.
She just wanted to be. The one. She had it figured out, and she knew what she was doing.
That is wild.
Competitive like her dad.
Yeah.
Well, let me ask you this, Jim. I mean, you're still intense. You're still competitive. You're still yet now retired. How does that feel, and how's
that working out?
And with your personality, what's next?
How's that working out?
Well, so I retired last June.
She's laughing.
So the plan is we bought a condo in Costa Rica. So the plan is to snowbird in Costa Rica, and we have property up on the Twist River, and we sold our house to Wenatchee, and we got a little tiny home and a fifth wheel on our property. And
nice.
I mean, we have Starlink and water, and I mean, it's certainly not roughing it by any stretch of the imagination. But we ended up, long story short, her daughter was going to school to become a nurse practitioner. She's a NIC unit RN, and then was going to school to become a nurse practitioner.
That's great.
She started the whole process, and she had a 2-year-old. Well, then she got 6 months into it, and now, long story short, she's got a 2-year-old and a 1-year-old.
All right.
And she's trying to go to school, work to keep her daycare, do online classes, So instead of going to Costa Rica, we end up in Reno, and taking care of grandkids. That was in September. Well,
Reno,
and I'm just going
Rica.
nuts. So I can't. I ended up applying. I was applying for so many jobs. I don't even know what I was.
Because you needed something to do.
People were calling me, but I didn't want to be. I didn't want it like a. Well, I had originally applied for a job in Klamath Falls. I got hired as the assistant principal athletic director in Klamath Falls, thinking I was going to drive up over the mountain. If you've ever been to Klamath Falls to Reno, it's about a 4.5-hour drive, and it's kind of like going over Stevens Pass. But during the wintertime. And then she had some health issues, and I just said, I can't do this. At some point in time, I got to put my wife before I put my personal career, and I was supposed to be retired. So we got to Reno, and then I started applying. I didn't want to have a job where I was required to be the guy that someone was in charge of something. I just wanted to be the guy that showed up when I'm supposed to show up and leave when I'm supposed to leave. And
I'm visualizing Bill Murray in Caddyshack and a greenskeeper.
So I started off
killing those
working as a special ed para at Galena High School, which was right near where my stepdaughter lived.
Oh my gosh!
And there was 14 kids, 2 teachers, and 3 pairs in this classroom. Absolute waste of taxpayer dollars. I don't know why I did nothing. I mean, absolutely nothing.
That's
I just couldn't.
So that's not working.
I started looking around, and Carson City, which is the capital of Nevada, is about 25 minutes from Reno. And I had applied for assistant basketball coaching. I thought, God, I'll just coach basketball. This wouldn't be so bad. And after I started working at Galena, their head coach called me and he says, hey, my principal says I really need to hire you. And I said, well, who's your principal? And he tells me the guy was the assistant principal at Nickell, which is North Kenai. When I was at Kenai, and we worked together. And so he had known, and we killed him all the time. We won. So
that was your job.
You just have to drop that little thing in.
This guy.
Yeah. You don't want to say that too loud. But okay.
So I said, okay, you tell Mr. Carson's he's got to get me a job in Carson City. So then I went and worked down there, and
so you're coaching still?
I was coaching freshman basketball.
Nice.
And but it is so it's so hard to come in blind and not have a relationship with kids, and kids not completely buying in. I mean, and it was very much entitled. It was a very entitled kind of. I mean, I had a kid tell me they took the 3 best freshmen. They'd never lost, and they took the 3 best freshmen and put them on the JV team. They should have put the best one on the varsity team, but his dad was assistant coach, and they didn't want the perception of. Yeah. But anyway, so this group of kids had never lost, but the kids that I was coaching had never been the guy, never had to do everything. They were just there riding the coattails of those 3 kids that were really good. Mm-hmm. And so they thought they were good. And I had a kid tell me we were getting beat in transition all the time. We would go up, and so I'm guarding you, and Angie decides she's going to come up and double team and guard you 94 feet from the basket, and then you throw it to the other end, and her guy's down there and shoots a lay-in, and now we're down. Mm-hmm. And so we were teaching them, okay, sprint back to the key and then come back to the 3-point line and pick up your man. Mm-hmm. Pick up at the 3-point line, retreat to the key, and then pick up at the 3-point line. And this kid raises his hand and, okay, what? Well, that's not how they teach it at UConn.
Like UConn at the university.
And I said, okay, well, first of all, you're never going to play at UConn.
Yeah.
Second of all, if you want to play at Carson City, you're going to do it how I tell you to do it. Otherwise, you're never going to get off the bench.
Right.
And this is a sign of times. Like in Kenai, I never would have heard anything about it. But I got home and had a parent phone call about the way I treated the kid's question, and I just. But anyway,
that goes to that ideology and culture thing, like and then the administration and legislation thing. Like
okay, so is everything good with her now?
So
then,
my daughter who lives in Kenai, Alaska. So I have a daughter in Kenai, Alaska. I have a daughter in San Antonio. I have a son in Klamath Falls, and I have a son in Denver. She has one in Reno and one in Phoenix. So we got every place covered.
You guys should be like on a traveling bus.
Yeah, really.
Yeah, you guys should be like living on the road.
So my daughter's having our second grandkid, and it's funny because my youngest daughter, when the kids were growing up, they all thought she was my favorite because she just wanted to do everything that Dad did. When I was going, I mean, some of the things that we did. We had this little Toyota Corolla, kind of like your car your daughter had.
The Honda. Yeah.
I drove the biggest beat-up car because I was the assistant principal in charge of discipline. And if someone wanted to do something in my car, it didn't matter. It was like I had a buddy that sold stuff online, hunting stuff like coyote calls and everything. And I had stickers on the side of my car advertising for him. And anyway. So she would do everything with me. I mean, I remember taking them to school, and all 4 of my kids, or 3, I didn't have Nick at the time, they'd climb in the trunk, and then they'd drive to school in the trunk of the car. If I ever got pulled over, I'd have been in so much trouble. But anyway, she's always kind of been, her and I have always had and she loves her dad. So when she's having the baby, she wants me to come up and be there when she has the baby. She had a real hard time with the first one. Was born in December. If you've ever been in Alaska in the wintertime when it's dark and there's, it gets light. It gets light at 11 and gets dark at 3. And I mean, it's really hard. It's really hard on moms that have, especially with kids. So then they come up with this great idea that I'll come up and long-term sub for her in middle school PE, no less. I always swore I'd never teach middle school, but so I spent the last 5 weeks of the school year up there subbing for her.
Oh my gosh, you guys are on a wild ride right now.
So now, and the guy that she teaches with, Sane's out of Prince William Sound, and so he's gone until they start school like the 13th of August, and he usually is down there until early September. So now she's coming up with the idea that now, Dad, you worked for me. Now you can come back and work with me. And so
there you go.
Maybe going back up, you have plan a trip up on the peninsula.
I'm going in the fall, in November, to up there to do some blacktail. Yeah.
Where are you going?
It's there? Prince of Wales.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so a friend of mine has a connection. I haven't done that, so I wanted to go to Kodiak, but he talked me into doing this first. And
if you go to Kodiak, take somebody with you that you want to sacrifice. Cause
that's what he said, I'm into those bears. So
the brown bears on Kodiak Island are huge, and they get so conditioned. You can shoot like 5 deer, and they're about the size of your dog, like a good-sized lab. Yeah. But they get conditioned to the shot of the gunshot.
Dinner bell,
By the time you get them gutted out, they'll be there.
Yeah, I did the black bear solo, so they were saying, that's not going to happen. You don't want to do that. Yeah. It's too dangerous. But anyway, Jim, it's been like, I don't know, hour and 45 minutes.
I know, yeah. But it's been fun.
I really, really appreciate you guys coming on. And
it's been great.
And sharing the stories.
I guarantee you people are going to love these stories.
I
guarantee.
Well, just one, the best thing about me when I was growing up in Chelan, the most underappreciated person was my Uncle Eudell. Yeah. He was a custodian at the high school.
Oh, my.
He only had 2 daughters, and so I was like the adopted son. So we had keys to the gym.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
He would be in there with us all the time.
He was the same umpire.
Yeah, right? He umpired softball.
I can't even tell you how many beers I drank with Eudell after softball tournaments.
I love that.
Him and
such a good guy.
Guys like Greg Moser and Roger Moser and those guys.
Were you in like Gene Edmonds?
He was older then.
Yeah, he was older.
So after I got done with high school, I played with my Uncle Eudell softball team with all of
those guys.
I was the young guy and I didn't never drink, and so I was always driving them everywhere, keeping them out of trouble, but just that was the beauty of being in Chelan, is those type of people and guys like Leo Miller and Bob Harris and all of those kinds. I mean, they're just
salt of the earth.
You can go back and look at all the people that made
I know all those guys. Yeah,
huge impact on people just here in Manson. It's the same kind of thing. That so many people had such an impact on you, and everyone has a little piece of who you became and why you're successful.
For sure. And I know this: that all your students, your kids, and grandkids and great grandkids that aren't born yet, this is going to be fun.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you again.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for
I appreciate
sitting with us too.
Checking out one more time. Small Towns Unscripted.